Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Vitamin Professor podcast, brought to you by VRM Media, publisher of Vitamin Retailer and Nutrition Industry Executive magazines in partnership with Nutraland USA. I'm your host, Gene Bruno, Professor Emeritus of Nutraceutical Science and Chief Scientific Officer of Nutraland USA. The purpose of this podcast is to help educate the dietary supplement industry about the science of nutraceuticals and other relevant topics. If you like what you hear and see, don't forget to like and subscribe. I am very pleased to have Bob Capelli on behalf of BGG as my first guest on this podcast. If you don't already know Bob, let me tell you a little bit about him. He has been involved in natural healing and herbology for 30 plus years. After graduating from Rutgers University, Bob spent 4 years traveling and working in developing countries in Asia and South America, where he learned about and developed a deep respect for the medicinal power of plants. When he returned to the U.S., Bob began working in the natural supplement industry, where he has remained for the last 3 decades. He is the lead author of 5 books, including a book on astaxanthin called Natural Astaxanthin, the supplement you can feel. He's also the author of dozens of articles for trade and consumer publications and scientific papers for peer-reviewed journals. Bob considers himself a living testimonial to the effectiveness of astaxanthin. After all, since starting to supplement with astaxanthin, his joint problems and muscle soreness have gone away, and he hasn't gotten a cold or flu in over 20 years. I can't even say that. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, thank you, Gene. Good to be here.
You know, Bob, I got to tell you, a few years ago at Supply Side West, somebody was doing a podcast there, and they wrote me in and said, hey, we want to ask you a couple of questions. And one of the questions they asked me was, what is your favorite nutraceutical to formulate with? Now, you know, I mean, I don't work that way. I work on what is the appropriate nutraceutical for that product. But I knew what they were looking for. So I said, you know, there's a couple of different ones that are common for me. And one of the ones I chose was astaxanthin because of so many of the broad applications that it has. So I think maybe, so I love astaxanthin, as you know. And where I'd like to start here is by asking you a question, and that is, what exactly is astaxanthin, and can you, for our listeners, summarize the major health wellness benefits of it?
Sure, absolutely, Gene. So the way I like to phrase it is that astaxanthin is the most protective molecule found in nature. It's really quite a remarkable scientific discovery. Most of the astaxanthin used for supplements is grown in microalgae. And I think the best way I can give our listeners a good idea of what astaxanthin is to talk about how it grows in the algae. So the algae is called Haematococcus pluvialis, and it's normally a green algae. And what we do is we create environmental stress to the algae. We do 2 different things. The first thing we do is we stop feeding it completely. So, Gene, as you know, and as I think almost everyone knows, any living organism, whether it be plant, animal, whatever, needs nutrition to survive. So we're trying to starve it to death. The second thing we do is, in its first stages of growth, it's covered from the sun. It's indoors or it's outdoors, but covered. And we put it in the final stage in direct UV exposure, very intense, where we grow. We grow at about a 7,000-foot elevation. And what the algae cells do as a survival mechanism is they hyperaccumulate astaxanthin. And in a period of about a week, they go from green to the color of astaxanthin, these cells. They go to a deep, deep red. And this is, I think, the very most amazing thing about astaxanthin. It shows how protective it is. These algae cells can live for over 40 years with no nutrition, no food, no water,
Wow.
in intense sunlight, in intense cold, in intense heat. Doesn't matter what you do to them. The astaxanthin is so protective that they survive. And when we take astaxanthin as a supplement, or if we eat like a nice wild salmon that has astaxanthin naturally in it, if we eat, take it internally into our bodies, it's documented to get throughout our entire bodies into all of our cells. And on a cellular level, it's doing the same thing in our cells that it does for the algae. It's protecting them. So as a result of this property, astaxanthin, well, it's two what I call foundational properties are that it's a very, very powerful and a high quality antioxidant, and it's also a broad spectrum anti-inflammatory. And because of those two foundational properties, there are really 10 now heavily researched areas of health benefits that we'll get into a little bit later.
Very, very cool. Thank you for that. So, you know, you've answered a couple of really good questions for me, but there's something that's been coming up lately that I've been seeing in the media in our industry, and I have a little problem with it. You probably heard about this cold pressed astaxanthin, right? And
Yeah.
that in this case they're touting the fact that it doesn't have cracked cells, like that's a good thing. And I have a mental disconnect with that concept. What are your thoughts about it?
No, you're you're very right on cue to have a mental disconnect on that, Gene, because it's really horrible. So, just as an overview, algae-based astaxanthin can be grown three different ways, and there are, our system is really a state-of-the-art system. It's outdoors, but it's in glass tubes.
Yeah.
So the glass tubes allow that incredible UV exposure from the sun, but being enclosed prevents any kind of contamination from other unwanted algae strains like protozoa, amoebas, contaminants, things you don't want in your algae cultures. Keeping it in the glass tubes is very important. It can also be grown in open ponds. It can also be grown indoors. We think we have the best system. Now, what some companies are doing is, and it's just a marketing ploy, which I don't actually mind marketing ploys personally. I mean, if companies have to, kind of, say things in a different way to sell their product, whatever, good for them. But what I think one or two companies are doing is they're trying to market something that's a huge negative as being
That's what I
something
thought.
good.
How do
Yeah.
you get to the
So
astaxanthin inside the cell if it's not cracked?
exactly. So the astaxanthin, the molecule, or I'm sorry, the algae shell is extremely hard. And nothing gets in or out of that very easily unless you actually have to mechanically crush these cells in order to open that cell wall. If you don't do that, Gene, you're not going to have any bioabsorption into the human body. So it's just like you're taking a capsule that means nothing. It's not going to do anything for you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So thank you for the clarification on that, because I thought that was a little odd to me. Now, another thing I've seen at some of the trade shows is that in addition to the common algae source, there are some other suppliers out there offering other sources of astaxanthin. Are you familiar with that, and what can you tell me about it?
Yeah, I am. There are now three major sources, I'd say, of astaxanthin production. Two of them are mostly confined to the animal feed industry. So astaxanthin, the first commercial use for it was when you grow salmon, for example, salmon or trout, on a farm, and you're feeding them non-natural diets. These fish, the flesh of the fish is like just like this horrible kind of beige, opaque, ugly, unattractive color. When you get like a nice wild salmon from Alaska, it's the good ones, especially the sockeye is the one that has the highest content of astaxanthin. The
Yeah.
sockeye salmon that's wild, it's eating the natural astaxanthin out of the environment, and the flesh of the salmon is nice and pink and attractive and
Right.
delicious looking. So what the farmers do, the salmon farmers, what they do is they take astaxanthin and feed it to the fish to make the flesh look attractive, and they almost always use synthetic astaxanthin, which is produced from petrochemicals,
Oh,
or they use also another source from a yeast called Fafia. And both these sources are a little bit, cheaper than the algae-based astaxanthin, but they're extremely different. For example, natural astaxanthin from algae is 20 to 90 times more potent as an antioxidant than synthetic. I mean, huge difference. It's the same molecule
Yeah.
chemically writing it, but there are a lot of differences in shape, in terms of esterification, that make the algae base far superior. And there have now been 6 different animal trials comparing head to head the algae base to synthetic or FAFIA in different species of animals. And every single one, natural astaxanthin performs far, far better than these other sources. So you have to, when you're sourcing astaxanthin, or if you're a consumer and you're looking for it in a brand, make sure that it's the natural astaxanthin from algae.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I would just add to that my thought that, besides its general effectiveness as an antioxidant and all that, astaxanthin has many, many studies on it for many, many purposes, but that's all algae based. So if you're using another source, you don't necessarily know you're going to get the same effect. And I would venture to say, based on what you told me, it's not likely you're going to get the same effect for so many of the different applications that astaxanthin offers. So again, thank you for that information. Now,
Gee, I'll just interrupt for one second. That's a very
yeah,
good
go
point,
ahead.
because I didn't even mention that, but the synthetic and the FAFIs, there aren't any human clinical trials on those. There's
Exactly.
no evidence whatsoever.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
You're buying
Yeah, no,
something that might be a little bit cheaper, but there's no
that might
evidence.
not do anything.
And it's 20 to 90 times weaker as an antioxidant. I mean, what's the point,
Yeah, no, exactly. Right. So you get something cheaper, but so what? It may not do anything. So yeah. Now, of course, let's assume that you are getting that you're buying a product and it actually indicates that the astaxanthin is from algae. That's fantastic. But I'm sure you've seen, and everybody in the industry have seen, that Now Foods is out testing a bunch of different kinds of products to see what their contents are. And that includes different astaxanthin supplements that they bought off the internet. And many that didn't necessarily meet the label claim. Can you elaborate on this and any kind of testing that maybe BGG does on its Astazine branded astaxanthin?
Yeah, so this is a huge point, and it's not just with astaxanthin; it's with a lot of supplements. But
Yeah,
astaxanthin
right.
is one of, I think, the key ones that Now Foods, and I give them a lot of credit for what they're doing. They're paying for all this testing just to show that you have to go with good brands in the industry if you're a consumer. Otherwise, you don't know what you're getting. And so they tested several different commercially sold consumer astaxanthin goods, and an organization that BGG is a member of, it's a trade association called NAXA, is the short name for it. It's the Natural Algae Astaxanthin Association. NAXA did the exact same thing that Now Foods did. Both entities bought just independently off the internet, I think mostly off Amazon, all different forms of astaxanthin, cheap, medium price, higher price, and tested them. And fairly consistently, these results are showing that less than half of the products on the market have the stated amount of astaxanthin in them. And some are really scary, Gene. Some of these products have 0 astaxanthin. Some of them say natural on the label, and it's synthetic. So you're getting something that's 29 times weaker as an antioxidant. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a wild west out there. You have to really go with good brands. You should go always with a supplier of natural astaxanthin that is a member of NAXA, the Natural Astaxanthin and Algae Association, because that organization actually does every year testing of all the member products and also lots of other products on the market that the brands that we sell to make sure that they're the real deal. And so this NAXA is doing a great service as well, just like Now Foods.
It's kind of like a third-party validation of the material. So that gives the not only people within the industry but consumers as well some assurances that what they're getting is the real deal, and actually there. Very good. So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've been talking about astaxanthin, its quality, and sort of some broad strokes. But as a person who's done a lot of formulating over my last 45 years in the industry, and having used astaxanthin for many, many different things, I kind of want to jump into that a little bit. So, I've written a few different articles on astaxanthin for Vitamin Retailer magazine, but look, you're one of the foremost astaxanthin experts. And so I would like you to elaborate, just kind of hit some high points on some of the different areas of application for astaxanthin. If you're out there formulating a product, what can you use it? What are the different things it can do?
So there are 10 very well documented areas of health benefits for astaxanthin, and each of these areas has a minimum of 5 human clinical trials, and some have dozens and dozens of clinical trials. So, we don't just talk about an area that has one clinical trial and say, "Oh, astaxanthin is great for blah blah blah."
Right.
That's not really ethical. We don't think. It should have some multiple areas of study that corroborate the same findings in order to be sure that it's going to work for that condition. So these areas, it's a great range. Eye and brain health for sure. Astaxanthin is documented to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier, get into the brain, and then once in the brain, cross the blood-retinal barrier to get into the eyes. So very important. It gets into skin. And a lot of nutrients, that we take into our body just don't get into the skin. So astaxanthin gets to the skin and provides its anti-inflammatory and antioxidant activity in the skin. It can bond with muscle tissue. That's why it's great for athletes. It does a lot of different things that other antioxidants can't do. So the other areas, eye and brain, cardiovascular health, skin health. It's great for athletes, of course, we mentioned, and anyone looking for higher energy levels. It's what I call the ultimate anti-aging nutrient because it's so good for so many different things associated with aging. It helps boost the immune system. It helps any kind of inflammatory conditions like joint, muscle, tendon issues. And overall antioxidant, just helping to prevent all kinds of potential issues, and so it's very, very well rounded. And it's really like I said, if you're over 40, you should be taking this product because it's going to help you in a lot of different ways, not just one.
You mentioned a number of things. I want to pick a couple of them and just dig a little deeper. One of the ones I just have to mention myself is that I've used astaxanthin in many, many formulations for skin health, especially when I get people who, companies that have come to me and said, "Can you formulate a product? We want something that's vegan friendly." So you're like, "Well, I can't use collagen, and what can I use?" And yet you've got some wonderful studies on astaxanthin showing reduction of, wrinkles, improvement in elasticity, improvement in skin moisturization. And what I love about it is that the active dose of astaxanthin for that was like 4 milligrams. Of course, you have to use more of the total material to yield the 4 milligrams, but it's still quite within reason. And to me, it's a great thing to add because not only do you get all these very specific skin benefits with structure function claims you can make, but you get all the additional antioxidant claims that you can make. So I personally love that one. But you also mentioned about anti-inflammatory, which is a big deal. Can you elaborate just a little bit on the anti-inflammatory properties of astaxanthin?
Yeah, and that's one of the two what I call foundational properties of astaxanthin. So as an anti-inflammatory, okay, if you think about anti-inflammatories, if you go to, say, a drugstore and you have some pain you're trying to treat, you got several different types of anti-inflammatories. You have your, say, OTC, over-the-counter, non-prescription anti-inflammatories like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. You have aspirin. You have your prescription drugs like Celebrex is still on the market. Vioxx was one that was a popular anti-inflammatory that was taken off because it actually caused a lot of people to have heart attacks, believe it or not. Anyway, that was an extreme case, the Vioxx causing heart attacks. But every one of these anti-inflammatories you get in a drugstore has side effects. Aspirin is very bad for your stomach lining, can cause ulcers. A lot of the NSAIDs, have liver damage properties and also can hurt your stomach in some cases. The list goes on and on. You get to the prescription ones like Celebrex, it can get really scary. They have a list this long of different potential side effects. Natural astaxanthin is different. It works on 8 completely different inflammatory markers at the same time, but it works in a gentle manner. So if you take Vioxx or Celebrex, you're targeting one of those inflammatory markers, the COX-2 enzyme,
Right.
intensely. And when you target something intensely and just wipe it out down to 0 level, it throws everything else in your body out of whack. And that's what causes these, potentially life-threatening side effects. Now, natural astaxanthin, it's going to slowly work on 8 different inflammatory markers in a gentle manner. Now, the key negative is that it takes a lot longer to work than a lot of these other pain-relieving anti-inflammatories, which can work the same day.
But Bob, you could say the same thing for just about all kinds of nutraceuticals. Most nutraceuticals that have studies showing effectiveness over a period of time, it takes some time for it to deliver its results. These aren't drugs. These are natural substances that take a while. So I don't necessarily see that as a negative, but sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, outstanding point, Gene. Outstanding point. And my question to people is, do you want an anti-inflammatory that's going to help your pain the same day, but potentially kill you? Or do you want something safe and natural that you have to take for about a month or so before it starts kicking in? But
I know the answer.
For any kind of, long-term chronic pain, once it starts working, it tends to work just as well as the other prescription and over-the-counter anti-inflammatories that have all the side effects. So, and it's had a lot of different studies. It's been studied for carpal tunnel syndrome. It's been studied for rheumatoid arthritis. It's been studied for joint soreness after exercise. It's been shown to prevent muscle damage and inflammation in the muscles. It's one really interesting study took astaxanthin and gave it to people with tennis elbow, which is a form of tendonitis.
Oh, yeah.
And that will make your grip strength very greatly reduced. They found in just 2 months that taking astaxanthin increased the grip strength by almost double, 93%. So no matter what your inflammatory condition is, I recommend start taking the astaxanthin, take it every day, and it's going to work very well. Just that, again, it won't work in the first day or two. That's for sure.
Sure. That makes sense. Well, thank you. That's great. There's a couple other areas I've personally found interesting I wanted to talk to you about. I know that BGG did a study on astaxanthin with regard to brain health. Could you talk a little bit about what the study found?
Absolutely. We did actually a couple studies that I would call related to brain health. One of them was done in Japan, and it took people that were getting a little older and they were having age-related forgetfulness. So nothing serious, no Alzheimer's or no senility, but just normal people getting a little older. And it assessed them a few different ways. It tested them a few different ways, but in each way it tested, it found improvements in memory, in memory domain, linguistic memory. It improved overall cognitive function. So this was a 9 milligram study, which was a little bit less than a lot of the other studies on brain health. A lot of them were done at 12 milligrams, but they found very, very nice results. There was another study on brain health that was done with astaxanthin, and we added another nutraceutical ingredient called tocotrienols. The same sort of people with mild forgetfulness, similar results, but only a little bit better. So that's a potential, if people looking to formulate, it's a potentially great formula. Now, the other completely different area of brain health that we tested was what I call mood state. And this was actually done in amateur athletes. This was done in people that were training for a half marathon. And, they found that just by taking astaxanthin, it decreased feelings of depression by 57%. Wow. It actually, depression, mental fatigue, it decreased by 36%. Just overall, what they call global mood state. That's just like, how are you feeling, mentally today? It increased it by 11% in just 2 months. So, another, very important area of brain health that's not as studied sometimes as cognition is just your mood state. And we did a study there too that was very, very positive.
Very cool. So listen, as long as we kind of touched on athletes, I know there's been some research on athletes. I know, as you mentioned, BGG did a study there. I also understand that, and I'm not sure if I got this right, so you'll have to correct me, that there's a study on athletes and there's also some relationship there to cardiovascular health. So just wondering about sort of the athletes and cardiovascular health in general as well, if you could elaborate on those just a little bit.
Yeah, you know what you find overall with astaxanthin in almost all of its various health benefits, you find this kind of broad spectrum effects where it's not just helping one area of, say, brain health, it's helping several. It's not just helping one area for athletes. In fact, with athletes, there's 12 documented clinically researched ways that can help athletes. 12. I mean, so that's probably the most widespread of all. We did a study at BGG on the same sort of group of amateur athletes that were doing endurance training. And we found that in just 2 months, these amateur athletes, their heart rate while they were training decreased by 10%. Very
Wow.
significant, 10%.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can imagine if the heart's working 10% less, that can certainly let you train better, longer. It can give you, potentially better results in your, say in a race. I mean, so that was a very interesting area of research. But again, for cardio, for athletes, for cardio, it helps increase blood flow. It dose dependently decreases LDL cholesterol oxidation, which is really the
That's
oxidation.
huge.
Yeah, that's what really causes the heart disease, much more so than just the LDL itself.
Right.
Decreases
Exactly.
blood pressure. I mean, again, all these different areas of research, there's always multiple ways it helps, not just a single way.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. So, in addition to the human research, I know that there has been some animal research, and I understand that BGG did a study, an animal study that was related to longevity. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. And I learned something myself that uh, there's a worm, a species of very, very small worm.
Is that
It's
C.
called,
elegans?
yeah.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
about that one. Okay. Yeah, well, you're
Well, I
much
just
more astute
that's a
than I
common worm used in research. So it
Yeah.
was a reasonable guess.
So yeah, the C. elegans, amazingly, the DNA structure of C. elegans is actually, even though it's a worm, it's very similar to humans. So they use that as what they call a model organism for longevity testing, and see if potentially things can help people increase their lifespan. And what they found when they tested this worm with and without astaxanthin, they found that astaxanthin had significant anti-aging results. It increased lifespan by 10% on average. It increased
Wow.
survival rates of these worms by 17 to 19%. And you actually find that same pattern in several other animal species. That there's actually now been 10 different studies published with different animal species, all showing that astaxanthin helps them live longer. No human study yet, but like several animal
Well,
studies.
that's a tough one to do. I mean, how long do you do that study for? Well, we're rounding year 40, and I mean, it's going to be tough to do that in humans. It's easier to, yeah,
Yeah.
do it in animals. But that's awesome. That and it kind of makes sense whenever you think about any kind of a powerful antioxidant. You consider its possibilities, possible applications to longevity. But it's very cool to see the replicated studies in animal species showing improvements in longevity. That's pretty awesome. So, you know, are there any, all the ones that we've talked about so far, are there any sort of, let's call it emerging areas of research on astaxanthin that might be worth mentioning?
Yeah, before we do that, I should just talk briefly about. I think I touched on all of the 10 that are very well documented with at least 5 studies. But just maybe talk, if you don't mind, Gene, like a little bit more about one or two of those, and then mention
Oh,
one.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't mention one at all, which was reproductive health. So
Oh, yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
really cool. But they found many couples that were having trouble conceiving a child that wanted to have a baby, and that where the men was diagnosed as having poor semen quality. And they
Yep.
did a human clinical study, and they gave half of the couples, they gave the man astaxanthin, and half the couples, the man took a placebo. And in 3 months, these couples that had been trying to have a baby for many, many years, some of them, and for over a year, all of them, uh, half of the astaxanthin group got pregnant in just 3 months. of astaxanthin usage.
Wow.
So it's really cool. And there's been, again, 5 other human studies backing that up. Immunity, I didn't talk about much, but I'd like to just, if you
Oh,
don't
hold on,
mind.
hold on, hold on. That's really interesting. I just want to ask you a question
Yeah,
about that. Do we think it
please.
has to do with improving the or reducing oxidation in the semen, and then perhaps the potential effects that that would have on sperm, or is it some other mechanism, or we don't really know, we just know it works?
You hit the nail on the head, Gene. So the astaxanthin helps reduce the oxidation in the sperm. It actually makes the sperm swim faster, and so they're healthier sperm. They're not suffering the effects of oxidation, and they're getting to the egg is what's happening. So, but yeah,
That's
it's all
fantastic.
based on the antioxidant properties. Yes.
Very interesting. Please continue on.
Oh, I was just going to talk briefly about the immune benefits because it's one of the
Oh,
areas of
sure.
astaxanthin usage that isn't publicized much, I don't think, and not a whole lot of brands are marketing that, but it's a great one. So a lot of, in fact, almost all the early research was done all at Washington State University. And up at Washington State, a couple professors, they were studying astaxanthin in all different types of species. Well, at first they started in vitro, and then they moved to mice, rats, cats, dogs, and humans. And in each of these different species, they found the same results. The astaxanthin helped boost immunity, helped lower DNA damage by up to 40%, helped increase, help reduce inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. So very, very great for immunity, but not well known. And then, Gene, you had asked about the emerging areas. So
Yeah, the emerging
just like,
areas. Yeah.
yeah, just like there are 10 areas that are very well established for human health, there are actually now 10 areas of emerging research, and 4 of those already have at least 1 or 2 human studies. But when they just have 1 or
Oh,
2 studies, I don't consider that sufficient evidence. So I don't put that into the category of, what I would consider almost like proven health benefits. I consider those still needs a little bit more research. So those 4 that have at least 1 or 2 human studies are, let's see, blood sugar improvement, for diabetic
oh,
people. Yeah, weight loss, believe it or not, and fat reduction. Um, liver, oh no, I'm sorry, respiratory health and gastrointestinal health. Those 4 areas are already starting to get close to being established. Then there are 6 where there are only animal or in vitro work, but some of them have a lot of research. So in terms of, say, supporting healthy cell lines, this is a chemopreventative type thing, and maybe, tumor reduction. There are 82 preclinical studies, a huge amount. Liver and kidney health, 75 studies. Then there's what else? Bone health, pancreatic health, ear health, and life extension we talked about. So again, 10 established areas, 10 emerging areas.
all right. So now I got a couple questions. Um, 2 of the areas you mentioned was kind of a intestinal gut health thing, and then also some weight loss. I'm wondering in the weight loss one, what the mechanism of action seems to be in helping with weight loss. Do we know what that is yet?
When you say we, that would be you and I. I don't have that
Yeah.
memorized, but I can't remember. There's for weight loss, there have been, I believe, 2 already human studies, and so 2 is not a lot, but it's better than 0, and it's even
But
better
you
than
know
1.
what? You know what? I
But
find that so interesting. And if so there's some of that data that can be shared with me, maybe on a future show. I just might mention it because I just think that's fascinating that there's some there's so many potential mechanisms by which it could work. So I was just curious, but if you have some of that data to share in the future, let me know, because I'd love to
okay,
share it with our listeners. How about the gut?
absolutely.
How about the gut health stuff? What's going on there? Is that an
Uh,
anti-inflammatory effect, or is that something else?
Yeah, so again, with gastrointestinal health, there's been 1 human study, and what that was done on was there's a bacteria called H. pylori, I believe it's called.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that can really have bad effects on your gut. It can actually cause ulcers,
Sure.
untreated. If there's a lot of it over time, it can actually cause cancer. And so astaxanthin in the human study, and there have been preclinical research as well, and there's 27 different preclinical studies for gastro. It helped reduce the H. pylori. And
That's
so that was
fantastic.
one mechanism. Yeah, one mechanism. There are other mechanisms, but again, like I focus more on the 10 very well established areas of research. So I don't have those memorized.
No, that's okay. That's all good. So we talked about, all the fantastic applications for astaxanthin, but are there any people who maybe shouldn't take it? How about pregnant women, that sort of thing?
To date, there have been found no contraindications or side effects to natural astaxanthin usage. Nothing, and they've done a lot of safety testing. They like one study, I couldn't believe it, but they gave 17,000 milligrams for each kilogram of body weight to pregnant rabbits. 17,000. I mean, humans, a big human being is taking like 2 to 12 milligrams most of the time.
Right.
These rabbits, 17,000 milligrams for each kilo they weighed, no ill effects. They didn't find any problems with the mothers,
Wow.
no problems with the babies, nothing. They've done all kinds of human safety studies. They've done the chronic safety studies where, people take a high dose over the course of, a month or two. They've done acute where people take one single dose of like, say, 200 milligrams. No matter what they've done, they've never found any ill side effect. There is one small side effect that sometimes people may find that, like say, like the palms of their hands, if they take big doses, might get a little kind of redder. But that's not
But
something
you
that's a
you
bad
see that
effect.
with you see that with some other carotenoids from time to time.
Yes,
I've been
yes.
around long enough in this industry to remember when you get like suntan in a bottle and they had different carotenoids in combination. And if you took those, it might give you a little bit of coloration. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you'd have to be taking some pretty hefty doses, I would imagine, to get to that level. Yeah.
Yes, true.
And speaking of doses, um, what are some of the dosage ranges? I know there's different doses for different applications, but what are some of the recommended dosage ranges for astaxanthin?
Yeah, so that's kind of a tough question. And the reason it's a tough question is because different humans' bodies have an incredibly different ability to absorb carotenoids from the diet. And the range is phenomenal. The range can be from about 5% absorption to over 90%. So can you imagine
Oh,
if Gene, if your body absorbs 90% of the carotenoids in your diet and you take 1 milligram of astaxanthin a day, you're probably going to have an incredible result. If my body only absorbs 5% of the astaxanthin in my diet, and I take 12 milligrams, which is usually the upper range of dosage, I may not have any effect. So we found in many different human clinical trials, we found in a couple different consumer surveys that roughly 80% of people that take astaxanthin find a feelable result. They can feel it working in their bodies and feel it or see it in their skin, for example. So that's a pretty good percentage, 80%.
oh
I
yeah.
have a feeling that the 20% that aren't getting any effects are just they're taking, maybe a dose that's just too low for their body. But in general, the range of research went from about 2 milligrams up to like 36 milligrams. The range of doses that most humans take in the market, usually 4 to 12 milligrams. Some like endurance athletes like to take 24 or even more. I personally recommend people for the first month take 24 milligrams a day to sort of load it up in all their cells. And then they can go down to maybe 12 milligrams for the next few months. And then, I mean, a lot of people get great results at 4 milligrams, which is usually the kind of lowest dosage sold in capsules or on the market.
Yeah.
You can kind of experiment on your own and see how it works for you. And maybe you can get down to 4 milligrams and save a little money. But the general range for daily use, 4 to 12 milligrams per day.
Very good. Now, there's something I wanted to add to this. So for years, again, I've been formulating products that included astaxanthin in there. And at this point in time, my preferred astaxanthin is the Astazine brand from BGG. And I'll just tell everybody why. And no, BGG is not paying me to say this. It's because, one, it's a quality material. Two, they have so many studies on their materials that I feel very confident in formulating with it that whatever formula I am putting it in, and as long as I'm using a clinically relevant dose, the likelihood of a positive effect is pretty high. And third is I find it to be, compared to some of the others out there, reasonably priced and fairly priced for such an outstanding material. So I just wanted to add that to the mix. And then, Bob, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you just like to add at this time?
Offhand, I mean, I'm very glad you said about BGG because we take great pride in what we do. And like you mentioned, there's only two companies that are sponsoring any sort of human clinical research, and that's us and one other. And there are about, like, I don't know, 25 different producers of natural astaxanthin now. So, if you want one that's studied, if you want one that's tested, because again, we're a member of the Natural Algae Astaxanthin Association that does the blind independent testing. If you want one that is 97% pure astaxanthin in the carotenoid fraction, it's the highest, purest, most concentrated astaxanthin on the market. It's Astazine by BGG. So I do appreciate that. Anything else to cover? I mean, you covered like pretty much everything, Gene. I mean, really, it's all I can say is that if you haven't tried it yet, if you're over 40, please just get on it. If you haven't tried it yet and you're under 40, especially if you exercise, if you care about your skin, it's not just good for people over 40, it's good for everybody. But what I encourage people to do is take it for a couple months. And like I said, take a nice dosage, take 24 milligrams a day for the first month, and maybe go down to 12. And if you don't see it working in your body, unfortunately, your body's not absorbing carotenoids well. But people that take it love it. And my last book, instead of having just consumers do testimonials, I took testimonials from all these famous doctors and pharmacists and college professors and people that had taken it themselves that were known and respected in the industry. And I wrote up, it's a whole chapter, so I think 15 pages long, about things that they said in their own words about how it works for them. So this product, I'm 3 years, not quite as long as Eugene, but 33 years in the nutraceutical industry. And I never saw anything like it. I actually, once I started taking it and found the effects myself, I actually solicited a job just to work with an astaxanthin producer. And I've been working for astaxanthin producer now for over 20 years, 22 years now. So I love the stuff, and I just want as many people as possible to try it.
So I personally take 8 milligrams a day. How much do you take?
I'm at 12, but
You're a 12 milligram guy.
Yeah. Well, I get it on discount, so
Well, there you go. All right. Yeah. So I would like to thank my first guest on my inaugural episode of the Vitamin Professor podcast, Bob Capelli, who was here on behalf of BGG talking about astaxanthin and, of course, more specifically the Astazine branded astaxanthin. And I'd like to remind everybody again, if you liked what you saw here, what you heard here, please like and subscribe. So thanks again, and I will see you for the next. Oh, one more from Bob.
I was going to add one thing. I want to thank you, Gene, because you are a great interviewer. I mean, the questions just flow. I mean, they're spot on, good questions, and you're just a nice guy to talk to. So it's been very. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you for that, Bob. So for all of you who are listening and watching, I look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of the Vitamin Professor podcast. Have a great day.